Hello and welcome to the next lecture. Today we're going to speak a little bit about transactions. So you already saw some of it. For example, we used transactional annotation in our previous methods. So transactions, or more correctly to say Java Transactions API, is mostly just in a library or extension that you can use throughout your application. And because it's supported by the JavaX community or extensions, it can be used mostly in all of the Java environments, for example, Java EE, including the Quarkus, of course. So if you want to be sure that it's present in your application, you can just use the Narayana GTA, or if you have any of the extensions for the Hibernate, this will be included, of course, as well. We can declare it just in case. So you can use Quarkus, Nara, Yana, GTA, like this. And now, even though we have the ORM, Hibernate ORM and all this stuff, this will, if you don't have any of the Hibernate, this will add it to your app. So the first and the easiest way to use the transactions is, of course, the transactional API that we used previously with this annotation, right? The transactional. Let's put it as well on the hello, on the main method, right? So for example, let's delete it, we don't need it anymore. So let's put a transactional API, and here you of course can book, for example, new book, right? You can create a book here and put some fields there. After, in our case, we don't need like title or something like this, equals test, and so you can call the persist for it if needed. Yeah, that's the easiest one. So you also can specify different types of the so this case is transaction type, so this takes type. And depending on your situation, each of them will be different. For example, the required transaction type is that it will create a new transaction, or if this method was called from somewhere where there was if it's already in transaction, let's say if it was called from the other place where transactions was started, it will join the same transaction. So no new transaction will be started. So for example, if I call some from other method, for example, if I call the hello method from the save book with this required type, right? This won't create a new transaction. So it will start from the save book. When you enter the hello method, it will continue working with the same transaction. So no new transactions will be started, right? So the required new, on the other hand, will start a new transaction. So in our case, if we start the save book, the transaction will be started. We call hello, another transaction will be started. The first one from the save book will be suspended. Then you do all your stuff with the transactions. After this method ends, we commit the transaction and resume the previous one. So this is how it works with it requires new. So mandatory, on the other hand, won't start any transaction, but it requires so that you have some transaction. So this method will be, this transaction type, sorry, will be helpful if you have some method that you that should only work to do something with transaction. I can say the example. I don't know, maybe you want to update some updated add fields or something like this, but it's helpful if you want to use this method only when you have some, the final step or something, or it should always be called from the from the other transaction. So it's useful for the API. So if you accidentally call it like from other place where there is no like transactions or database stuff going on, it will fail basically, right? So never, on the other hand, is the reverse of the mandatory. So if some transactions was started, they will raise an exception. Otherwise, it will work without transaction. So if there was no transaction, it will continue working as is. So again, supports will join any transaction that you have. So if you started the transaction, it will join the transaction. Otherwise, if there is no transaction, you just continue working as is. So it's just helpful for the methods that, let's say, doesn't require a transaction, but can be used to whatever the status is. And the last one, not supported, it's basically just if there was transaction, it suspends it, does its job, and then continues the previous transaction. So in our case, if we use a not supported in this case, right? So we create a transaction, we start the method, we call hello, the transaction will be suspended, then we do some stuff. When we exit the hello method, the old transaction from the savebook will be restored, and you do your job basically, right? So something like this. So in general, you of course can use the required, it's the default one. So even if you like remove it, so most of the time required will be you know, the best option. So you can just put a transactional API here, and that's more than enough, right? So one more thing that you can get is you can go call the inject transaction manager. So for example, you can use this transaction manager to set the transaction to rollback only. So that means that when it ends, it will roll back all the stuff that was executed basically. So you mark the transaction as rollback. Let's say it like this. And so everything that you've done in this transaction that's related to this line of code, so any transaction that was executed in this line of code and it's active, it will be rolled back. So that's like this. So this is one of the methods, one of the options that you can use for managing the transaction. The other one that you can use, so another method that you can use is you can use a user transaction interface. And so you can, let's create a new method. So let's call it path, and then we have an author, right? And it will be a post, for example, or let's use for clarity get. This will be just a demo method, right? So it won't produce anything, and we won't have it transactional. So let's give it response as a result. Create author like this. We don't need anything here, just I want to show you the user transaction. So you firstly need to start a user transaction by begin like this, and you'll have 2 more exceptions to handle. Then you need to, let's create a new author, of course, right? So let's create author first name equals test, and the last name will be test as well. It doesn't matter what we put, just want to show you the result after. Yeah, that's enough. So we call the persist in our case, and we call the user transaction commit like this. So this thing, you can see that there is one more exception here. Let's add them as well, and you can see the problem already. So you need to handle 5 different exceptions if something goes wrong with it. So taking the transactional API, you don't see anything of it. You have just 1 line of code. For the same logic, you need to have 3 of them, right? If we don't include this, if we include one of them as a whole line, right? So begin commit is there. So let's call the book author, right? Author, and of course we need to return something, right? So return response okay build, right? Something like this. We don't need anything here. So let's call a get method here, and okay, so I see the exception or problem already. You can see the duplicated key here, which specifies that we have the problem with the application. So it's not the problem with our part. So if we go to the import SQL and disable the authors or disable everything here, you will see that it will work from the first try. So it was the exception not from our part, but you know, I mean, not from our part, but from the other video. So yeah, so so this works perfectly, but of course it will be a lot better to use transactional API. So the annotations, I mean. So yeah, and yeah, so you can also mark the user transactions as rollback. So you can actually roll back a transaction as well. So you don't want to commit, you just roll back it. So like this. And yeah, now you know how to use the transactions, Java transactional API with Quarkus, what library you need to connect, and how to use the transaction manager in actual user transactions, and of course the transactional endpoint, and you know different types of it. So yeah, so thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.